What authorities discovered in a remote Alabama house in 1968 would become one of the most shocking family secrets in American legal history. But the real horror wasn't just what they found that day, it was realizing this nightmare had been going on for nearly a century. Stay with us, because what happened next will leave you speechless. Deep in the hills of Alabama, far from the changing world of the 1960s, sat a house that time forgot. The Harmon family had lived there for 4 generations, completely cut off from the outside world. What happened inside those walls would eventually make headlines across the nation. On November 23, 1968, social worker Thomas Wheeler got a call that would haunt him forever. Someone had reported children living in terrible conditions at a remote property south of Birmingham. Wheeler grabbed Deputy Sheriff Robert Collins, and together they drove into the wilderness. After an hour of navigating barely visible dirt paths, they finally reached a clearing. What they saw looked like something from a horror movie. A 2-story house stood before them, its white paint peeling away like dead skin. The yard was filled with rusted car parts, broken tools, and garbage. Skinny chickens wandered through the mess, and a half-starved dog was chained to a wooden post. The smell hit them first when they knocked on the door. It was a mixture of mold, decay, and human waste that made both men cover their noses. The door opened slowly, revealing a tall, thin man who looked much older than his 50 years. His shoulders were hunched, his eyes suspicious. "I'm Elma Harmon," he said reluctantly. "What do you want?" Wheeler explained they were there to check on the children. Elma hesitated, then stepped aside to let them in. What they saw inside was even worse than the outside. The main room was dark and filthy. In one corner, a young woman who couldn't have been older than 35 sat holding a tiny baby. Her eyes were dull, her face hollow. Elma introduced her as his wife, Mary. But then Wheeler noticed something that made his blood run cold. In a rocking chair nearby sat an elderly woman, at least 70 years old. She was also holding a baby, one that looked only a few months old. "This is my mother, Martha," Elma said casually, as if nothing was unusual. Wheeler's training kicked in. "And whose baby is that?" he asked, pointing to the infant in Martha's arms. "Mine," the old woman replied without any shame. "He's my son." Before Wheeler could process this shocking admission, footsteps creaked on the stairs above. A teenage girl came down, carrying yet another baby. The girl appeared to be about 16, but something was clearly wrong. Her eyes were spaced too far apart, her chin was underdeveloped, and her ears sat unusually low on her head, all signs of genetic problems. "This is Ruth, my daughter," Elma announced with disturbing pride. "And that's her baby." Wheeler felt sick. 3 generations of women. 3 babies. All in the same house. Collins, the deputy sheriff, had seen enough. "Who's the father of these children?" he demanded. Elma's answer would echo through courtrooms for years to come. "They're all mine," he said defiantly, his chest puffed out with twisted pride. "Every single one of them. I'm the father of all 3 babies." The silence that followed was deafening. Wheeler and Collins stared at each other in horror. Elmer Harmon had just admitted to the unthinkable, he had been having relations with his own mother, his wife, and his teenage daughter. All 3 women had given birth to his children. But Elma wasn't finished. His next words revealed the true depth of the family's isolation and delusion. "The laws of God and regular people don't apply here," he continued, his voice growing stronger. "We're special. We've been keeping our bloodline pure for generations. This is how my family has always lived." Wheeler realized they weren't just looking at child neglect, they were staring at a genetic and moral nightmare that had been hidden in these hills for decades, possibly longer. The babies showed clear signs of the devastating effects of inbreeding. The teenage daughter's facial deformities told a story of generations of forbidden relationships. Within hours, the remote Harmon property would be swarming with police cars, social workers, and investigators. The local newspaper would run headlines that shocked the entire state. The case would eventually reach the Shelby County Courthouse, where lawyers and judges would struggle to understand how such horror could exist in modern America. But the discovery that November Day was just the beginning. As investigators dug deeper into the Harmon family history, they would uncover a pattern of isolation and inbreeding that stretched back nearly a century. They would find evidence that this wasn't just one man's twisted behavior, it was a family tradition passed down through generations. The 3 babies found that day would become the center of a legal battle that would change how authorities handle cases of extreme family dysfunction. The story would expose the dark side of rural isolation and the devastating consequences when families cut themselves off from society for too long. The horror investigators found in 1968 was just the tip of the iceberg. Hidden diaries would reveal that Elma Harmon wasn't the first. This nightmare had been a family tradition for over 100 years. But when authorities discovered what was buried in the backyard, they realized the true scale of this genetic catastrophe. What they found will make your blood run cold. To understand how the Harmon family became America's most twisted bloodline, we have to go back to where it all began, during the chaos of the Civil War. In 1863, a Confederate soldier named Jeremiah Harmon made a decision that would doom generations of his descendants. Tired of war and fearing for his life, Jeremiah deserted his unit and fled deep into the Alabama wilderness with a small group of relatives, his young wife, his sister, and 2 cousins. Jeremiah wasn't just a deserter. He was a violent, paranoid man who chose the most remote location he could find to hide from authorities. What started as a temporary hideout became a permanent prison. Cut off from the outside world, this small group of 5 people would become the foundation of one of the most genetically closed families in American history. But here's where the story gets truly disturbing. When investigators searched the Harmon property in 1968, they made a chilling discovery. Hidden throughout the house were dozens of handwritten diaries, some dating back nearly a century. These journals revealed that the family's twisted practices weren't accidental, they were planned and celebrated. One diary entry, written by Elma's father Frederick in 1932, sent shivers down investigators' spines. "We keep our blood clean while the world out there corrupts itself. Each Harmon generation grows stronger than the previous one. Weak children don't survive here. Only the strong remain. It's the law of nature." This wasn't just one man's delusion. This was a belief system passed down like a sacred tradition from father to son, generation after generation. The Harmons had convinced themselves they were creating some kind of superior bloodline by keeping marriages within the family. But what about Mary, Elma's wife? How did an outsider end up trapped in this nightmare? Mary's story is heartbreaking. In 1952, she was just a 16-year-old girl from a desperately poor family about 30 miles away. When she met 34-year-old Elma at an agricultural fair, she thought he was her ticket out of poverty. She had no idea she was walking into something far worse than anything she'd left behind. The moment Mary arrived at the Harmon property, she knew she'd made a terrible mistake. The house was falling apart. There was barely enough food to survive. But most horrifying of all, she quickly realized there was something deeply wrong with the relationships between Elma and the other family members, especially his mother Martha. When Mary discovered that Elma was having relations with his own mother and that Martha was pregnant with his child, she tried to run. She almost made it to the main road before Elma caught her. What happened next shows just how far this family had fallen from normal human behavior. They chained Mary in the barn like an animal for weeks. This wasn't just punishment, it was the beginning of 15 years of captivity. Mary became a prisoner in her own marriage, trapped in a house of horrors with no way to escape. Dr. Richard Thompson, a geneticist who later studied the Harmon case, explained the devastating science behind what was happening. When a population remains isolated for generations and consistently practices inbreeding, we see a gradual collapse of genetic diversity. Harmful mutations that would normally be diluted by outside genetics become concentrated and amplified. The results were horrific. Of the 8 children Martha had given birth to over the years, only 3 survived to adulthood. The others died from severe birth defects and genetic complications. Ruth, The teenage daughter investigators found in 1968, was living proof of this genetic collapse. Beyond her unusual facial features, she suffered from severe scoliosis that twisted her spine, fused fingers on both hands, and significant mental delays. She was barely functional, a victim of her family's twisted ideology. But the most chilling discovery was yet to come. Behind the main house, investigators found something that still haunts them today, an improvised cemetery filled with tiny graves. Dozens of small wooden crosses, many rotted and falling over, marked the final resting places of Harmon children who never had a chance at life. Some graves had names carved into the wood. Others had only numbers. No dates. No ages. Just numbers, as if these children were experiments rather than human beings. The family had created an elaborate belief system to justify this horror. They didn't see inbreeding as wrong or harmful. Instead, they called it preserving the Harmon essence, some mystical concept of family purity that they believed made them superior to the outside world. As investigators dug deeper into the family's dark history, they uncovered an even more disturbing truth. Elma wasn't the first Harmon to maintain relationships with multiple generations of women in his family. His grandfather Isaiah had done the exact same thing, having children with his mother, his sister, and two of his own daughters. This pattern of abuse and genetic manipulation had been repeating itself for over a century, hidden away in the Alabama hills where no one could see or stop it. What authorities found when they finally entered the Harmon house to rescue the family members was worse than anyone imagined. Hidden in the attic were two more victims, and their condition would shock even the most experienced doctors. But Elma's chilling words during his arrest revealed the true depth of his delusion. December 12, 1968. After 3 weeks of careful planning, a massive rescue operation was finally ready to begin. Social workers, police officers, and medical teams surrounded the remote Harmon property, prepared for anything, including armed resistance. But when they arrived, they found something unexpected. Elma Harmon was sitting calmly on his front porch, as if he'd been waiting for them. "You've come to destroy something you can't understand," were his first words to Sheriff Tanner. His voice was eerily calm, almost philosophical. 100 years of Harmon history ends today. There was no fight. No screaming. No violence. Elma simply stood up and walked toward the police cars like a man accepting his fate. Inside the house, however, the medical teams discovered that the horror was even worse than they'd initially thought. Yes, they found Martha, Mary, and Ruth with their babies, just as expected. But then they heard sounds coming from above. In the cramped, sweltering attic, hidden from the world, were two more victims, 14-year-old twin boys named Jacob and Joseph. The sight of them left the rescue team speechless. Dr. Elizabeth Carter, a pediatrician who was part of the medical team, later described what she saw. It was like entering a museum of horrors of human genetics. Every single person in that house carried visible marks of generations of inbreeding. But those twins, I'd never seen anything like it. Both boys suffered from a rare condition called phocomelia, which caused their arms and legs to be severely underdeveloped and deformed. They could barely walk. Their intellectual disabilities were profound, and both had serious heart problems that made every breath a struggle. The rescue operation moved slowly and carefully. Each family member had to be approached with extreme caution, not because they were dangerous, but because they'd been so isolated from normal human contact for so long. Martha, despite being 70 years old, surprised everyone with how sharp and defiant she remained. As medical workers tried to help her, she spoke with startling clarity, "You think you're saving us, but you're just separating what God has joined together. The Harmons are special. We always have been." Mary's reaction was completely different. The moment she realized she was being taken away from the property, relief washed over her face like sunrise after a long, dark night. When a social worker got a moment alone with her, Mary grabbed the woman's arm and whispered desperately, "Please don't let him find us again. He'll kill us all if that happens." But perhaps the most heartbreaking reaction came from Ruth, the 16-year-old daughter. She seemed unable to understand what was happening around her. Clutching her baby tightly, she rocked back and forth, repeating the same disturbing phrase over and over, "Daddy comes back. Daddy always comes back. We're special. We're Harmon." The weeks that followed brought one shocking medical discovery after another. Detailed examinations revealed the full extent of the genetic catastrophe that had been unfolding in that house for generations. The twin boys, Jacob and Joseph, were living proof of what happens when harmful genetic mutations accumulate over time. Besides their physical deformities and intellectual disabilities, both had congenital heart problems that doctors knew would likely shorten their lives significantly. Ruth, at just 16 years old, showed signs of premature aging that belonged on someone twice her age. Severe arthritis had already twisted her hands and spine. Her baby, the product of her relationship with her own father, was diagnosed with Apert syndrome, a condition that caused the bones in his skull to fuse prematurely, creating severe facial deformities. Most tragic of all was Martha's baby. Multiple heart defects made survival unlikely. Doctors predicted the infant would die within months. Their grim prediction proved accurate. The baby passed away in February 1969. During psychological evaluations, the true horror of the family's mental conditioning became clear. The women and children had been completely brainwashed. They genuinely believed that inbreeding wasn't just acceptable, it was their sacred duty to preserve what they called the Harmon essence. Mary was the only one who showed any resistance to these beliefs. In her sessions with psychologists, she broke down and revealed years of attempted escapes. "I knew it was wrong. I always knew," she confessed through tears. "I tried to escape with the children 3 times. March 17, 1969. The Shelby County Courthouse had never seen anything like it. Despite strict press restrictions, news of the Harmon trial spread like wildfire. Citizens lined up before dawn, desperate to secure courtroom seats for this historic case. Judge Harold Montgomery looked at the packed courtroom with concern. Before proceedings began, he warned the jury, "You are about to hear testimonies that will challenge your understanding of human nature. I ask you to maintain objectivity despite the shock you will feel." District Attorney Jonathan Reynolds opened with words that echoed through legal history, "This is not just the trial of one man. This is the trial of an entire twisted system that transformed a family into a perverse genetic experiment where children were born condemned to suffering." Defense attorney Theodore Barnes faced an impossible task. Court appointed because no lawyer would voluntarily take the case, Barnes had only one strategy: argue that Elma was a product of generations of isolation and inbreeding, lacking mental capacity to understand his crimes. Reynolds immediately demolished this defense. Elma Harmon was not isolated from reality. He interacted with the outside world when it suited him. He consciously chose to hide his practices because deep down, he knew they were wrong. But nothing in those opening statements prepared anyone for what came next. On the 4th day, Mary Harmon testified via closed-circuit television due to her fragile mental state. When her image appeared on courtroom screens, complete silence fell over the audience. Mary began quietly, "I was 16 when I met Elma. He promised me a better life. Said he had land, a big house, that we would never want for anything." She described arriving at the Harmon property and her gradual, horrifying realization of what she'd entered. Her voice strengthened as she spoke about her first escape attempt after discovering Martha was pregnant with Elma's child. "He dragged me back by my hair," Mary continued, her words cutting through the silence. "I spent 3 weeks chained in that barn in the freezing cold. 3 weeks like an animal." The most devastating moment came when Mary described how Elma justified his actions. "He said it was our purpose, that Harmons had special blood that needed staying pure. When children were born with problems and died, he said they weren't true Harmons, that nature was eliminating the weak." During cross-examination, Barnes made a fatal mistake, suggesting Mary had been conditioned to accept these practices. Her response became one of legal history's most powerful statements. "Every single day of those 16 years, I thought about running away. Every day, I thought about killing Elma while he slept. Every day, I dreamed of someone rescuing us. I survived because I had children to protect. If that makes me an accomplice in your eyes, may God have mercy on your soul. You don't understand what it's like living in hell." The courtroom erupted. Several jurors cried visibly. Even the judge paused to compose himself. Expert witnesses followed, psychologists, anthropologists, and geneticists explaining how isolated communities develop twisted belief systems and the biological consequences of prolonged inbreeding. But everyone waited for the main event. On the 10th day, against his lawyer's desperate advice, Elmer Harmon took the witness stand. The moment he stood, the courtroom fell dead silent. His first words sent chills down everyone's spine: "I am the guardian of the Harmon lineage. What you call crimes, we call sacred duties." Elma's testimony revealed his complete delusion. He spoke about great-grandfather Jeremiah like a prophet. Jeremiah saw the future. He saw the world would become impure, that bloodlines would mix until nothing valuable remained. Harmons are the last bearers of true blood. Reynolds's cross-examination was masterful. Step by step, he led Elma to admit he maintained regular outside contact when necessary and deliberately concealed practices because he knew they'd be condemned. "So you knew society would disapprove?" Reynolds asked. "Society is corrupt," Elma replied coldly. "Their disapproval means nothing. But you hid your behavior anyway." For the first time, Elma hesitated. "We maintained privacy to protect our sacred work." The trap was set. Reynolds had proven Elma understood right from wrong, he simply chose wrong every time. Elma's chilling testimony exposed a man not insane, but something worse, completely without conscience. How would the jury react to this unprecedented case? What verdict could deliver justice for over a century of horror? The final arguments and verdict would shock the nation and set legal precedents still influencing cases today. The jury's verdict would shock the nation, but Elma's final words in that courtroom contained a terrifying warning that would prove prophetic. What scientists discovered years later about the Harmon bloodline would reveal that this nightmare was far from over. In fact, the horror had spread much further than anyone imagined. Prosecutor Reynolds delivered his final blow with devastating precision. "So you knew society considered your actions wrong, but you decided you were above these laws. This isn't delusion, Mr. Harmon. This is criminal arrogance." After 6 tense hours of deliberation, the jury returned with their verdict. Guilty on all charges. The courtroom erupted in a mixture of relief and horror. 2 weeks later, Judge Montgomery pronounced one of the harshest sentences in Alabama legal history, multiple consecutive penalties totaling 197 years in prison. Elma would die behind bars. Upon hearing the sentence, Elma remained completely emotionless. But his final recorded words, directed at Prosecutor Reynolds, would haunt everyone present: "You think you ended the Harmon lineage today, but we are like seeds in the wind. Some always find fertile soil. One day you will understand." Those chilling words would prove more prophetic than anyone realized. The trial's end didn't close the Harmon story, it opened a new chapter that would reveal scientific discoveries and consequences extending for generations. The surviving family members were scattered to different institutions. Martha died in 1972 at a long-term care facility, taking many family secrets to her grave. Mary, after extensive counseling, managed to partially rebuild her life under a completely new identity. The twin boys, Jacob and Joseph, were placed in a specialized institution for their complex medical needs. Ruth entered a rehabilitation program for young people with special needs. The innocent babies were adopted by carefully screened families. But the scientific community had become fascinated by this unprecedented case. In 1975, Dr. Richard Thompson obtained approval for something that had never been attempted before, a longitudinal study of the surviving Harmon family members. The Harmon Project would systematically document the genetic consequences of 4 generations of inbreeding. What we learned transformed our understanding of how extreme inbreeding affects the human genome, Thompson explained years later. The preliminary findings were staggering. Researchers identified multiple rare recessive genes appearing with alarming frequency in the Harmon bloodline. Most significant was the discovery of a rare metabolic condition they named Thomson-Harmon syndrome, characterized by an enzyme deficiency affecting amino acid metabolism. This condition appeared in nearly 40% of studied Harmon descendants. But then researchers made a discovery that sent shockwaves through the scientific community. The Harmon lineage had spread far beyond that isolated Alabama property. Between 1880 and 1920, several young men from the family had left to establish their own branches in other remote areas. We identified at least 3 isolated communities in rural Alabama, Mississippi, and Tennessee where direct descendants of Jeremiah Harmon had settled, revealed anthropologist Dr. James Peterson. These communities didn't practice inbreeding as extreme as Elma's branch, but they maintained significant genetic isolation. The nightmare had been quietly spreading for decades. In 1988, researchers made an even more startling discovery. They identified a 30-year-old woman with distinctive Harmon facial features. Genetic tests confirmed she was Elma's biological daughter, conceived before his arrest. Her mother had been a temporary worker who fled the property and later gave the child up for adoption. This woman, known only as Subject AK-47 in research documents, had grown up in a normal environment with proper nutrition, education, and medical care. Surprisingly, she demonstrated fewer health problems than other direct descendants, although she still carried distinctive genetic characteristics. AK-47's case shows how the environment can partially overcome even severe genetic predispositions, concluded Thompson. It's a powerful reminder of the complex interaction between nature and nurture. By 1992, with advanced genetic sequencing techniques, researchers identified what they called the Harmon signature, a unique combination of genetic variants producing characteristic physical and neurological conditions. They found at least 14 specific mutations that, when combined, created the problems repeatedly observed in Elma's descendants. Elma Harmon died in prison in 1994 at age 76, never showing remorse for his crimes. But Mary, living under her new identity, agreed to give one final interview that would provide closure to this horrific saga. "People remember the horror, the shock, the disturbing details," she said quietly. "What they don't see are the lives that continued afterward, the children who survived, the grandchildren who were born, how some of us managed to find peace despite everything." Mary revealed she considered the scientific research a way to give meaning to her family's suffering. "If something good can come from this terrible story, it's the knowledge that will help other people. Each discovery they make using our DNA is a small victory against the evil that Elma represented." Mary's words remind us that even from humanity's darkest chapters, knowledge and healing can emerge. The Harmon case changed how we understand genetics, isolation, and human resilience. But most importantly, it showed that even in hell, hope can survive. In the early 2000s, as the Human Genome Project was changing the future of science, researchers took another look at the infamous Harmon family case. What they uncovered was groundbreaking. For the first time, scientists were able to map, with astonishing precision, the countless mutations within the family's bloodline. The result was the most detailed genetic record of extreme inbreeding ever assembled. But here's where it gets even more fascinating. Alongside dangerous mutations, researchers discovered what they called resilience genes. These rare genetic variants acted like hidden shields, protecting some family members from the devastating effects of their ancestry. For science, the Harmon case became a turning point, a reminder of how human genetics can both destroy and protect. For society, it stands as a cautionary tale about isolation, secrecy, and the need to safeguard the most vulnerable. Dr. Thompson, one of the lead researchers, summed it up before his retirement. "The story of the Harmons is not just about destruction. It's also about resilience, about finding peace and meaning, even in the harshest circumstances imaginable." Subscribe now and let us know in the comments if you would want us to uncover a specific story for you.